Hi, this is Chris Dodkin, and this is a short video just to walk people through the ACR RAW conversion process I use with Fuji X-Pro1 RAW files. So this is looking at the out-of-camera JPEG that the Fuji camera produces and comparing that to what you can get using Adobe Camera Raw and converting the equivalent RAW image, in this case into Photoshop CS6. So the image I have up here on screen is a JPEG out of camera from the X-Pro1. So this is straight out of camera. A lot of the questions that have been posed have been around the ability of the RAW processor to look at foliage. So I figured I'd pick an image which had some foliage in it. And if we zoom in on the tree in this case, on this out-of-camera JPEG, we can see that the camera has rendered some nice foliage here. There's plenty of detail out of camera, both in the bark of the tree and in the leaves. Nice shades of green, etc. But I did want to point out on this image, and this is something we'll go and look at with the RAW file, if we zoom into the out of focus areas at the top of the image here, we can see that there's some chromatic aberration already in the JPEG as it comes out of camera. So this is a classic case where the camera's done its thing with JPEG, but it hasn't actually made corrections for image anomalies generated by the wide angle lens, in this case the Fuji 18mm lens. And this is something we'd definitely want to fix if we were post-processing the equivalent RAW image. So I figure this is a good starting point. We'll leave that up in the background. And what I'll do is I'll pull the same file, which is file number 5976. I'll go find the same file, 5976, but the Fuji RAW file, the RAF file. And what I'll do here is I'll reset to the defaults, so we can start this image from scratch exactly as it comes from the RAW file. So you'll see here in ACR, I've just reset everything back to a start position. Here's my file. Looks a little lacking compared to the JPEG we were just looking at, but that's not surprising. All RAW files come in looking somewhat flat, usually soft, and this is the whole point of using ACR, is to get the most out of that file. So first thing I do on every X-Pro1 file I get in, I typically move away from the as shot white balance, and if I'm shooting outdoors, I'll go to daylight setting as a start position. Why do I do that? It immediately adds warmth back into most images, which the auto white balance has tried to correct out. So if I go back to as shot, that's quite a cold look. If I move to daylight white balance, it immediately brings some natural warmth back into the image. That's a really good starting point. I would recommend that to anybody, and then tweak your color temperature, etc. from there. In this case, I'll leave it as daylight. Next thing I do on every single image as a first pass is I look at the highlights. In this case, there's some areas of bright sunlight hitting the wall here, and if I click on my Alt key on my Mac and the highlight slider, ACR will show me where the overexposed areas that are out of range on the histogram. And if I start to then back off my highlight slider, I can start to reduce those overexposed areas. And one of the advantages of my RAW file is there is still information that I can recover from that RAW file. I'm not clipped. As I slide that highlight slider backwards and forwards, if you look at the histogram in the top right, there's still data being recovered from the overexposed areas of the image. It's not clipping, and I'll just back that off until there's almost no overexposed areas. A couple of spots I'm not too worried about. I could take it all the way to the end here. That looks about right. So if I release my Alt key, my image now has got recovered information in these highlight areas and in the sky that wasn't there previously. Next thing I always do is go and look at the black levels. I find that every single X-Pro1 image, almost without exception, is well exposed to the right, but does not have very good black levels in it. It's just a feature of the camera. It's something you learn to go with. So again, I press my Alt key and I click on my black slider, and it shows me there's almost no black or dark image content in this image at all. If I start to move the slider down, I gradually introduce darkness into, or black areas into the image, and I'm looking to get some solid black areas in the deep shade. If I let go my Alt key, I can kind of visually look at that and then go backwards and forwards to see where the true blacks are in the image. And I've got some there in the doorways, which I'm happy with. The reason for introducing the blacks into the image, twofold. One, I want to get the maximum dynamic range out of the image, but also from a perceptual point of view. If I'm viewing an image that has true blacks in it and areas of darker color, it visually presents you with a sharper looking image, but without doing any edge enhancement. Your brain will see the contrast between the dark and the lighter areas, and will see that as a sharper image. And that's a key trick to work with any RAW file, but works extremely well on the X-Pro1 images. So we've done highlights and black levels on our image. We've done our white balance to daylight. We've got our basic kind of start position set up. Let's go in and address that CA issue that we saw, the chromatic aberration issue. This is the effect that's been caused by the 18mm lens we've used in this case. And you see this as a kind of colored fringing around these twigs and leaves in the upper part of the image. Well, ACR's got a tool to correct that. You go over here to this lens corrections icon, and there's a section here under lens corrections called color, and there's a checkbox which says remove chromatic aberration. Check that box, and you've got two sliders. You've got a purple and a green slider, and those refer to the colors of chromatic aberration that you see in the image. And here we're seeing, if I zoom right in, you're seeing a lot of purple. Grab the purple slider, pull it up to something around 4, I'm guessing, and straight away you can see that that's been removed from the image. I can show you the difference by going backwards and forwards, and I've got some green now showing, which I need to get rid of. Let's bring that up to about 4 as well in this case. I've now got, if I look at this twig running along here under the magnifying glass, or any of these leaves, I don't have that purple or green fringing around it to the same extent, if at all. And the idea is to fine-tune this to remove that completely. And don't forget, this is something you could not do in camera. This is something we can do in the RAW process. You could go back to the JPEG file and look to do the same sort of work, I think. But here we're doing it on the RAW file, so we're maximizing our image quality. So just by using this simple tool, I've removed an element of blurring from the image, which is very apparent at 200% here. Would be less apparent at full size, but nevertheless was definitely going to be reducing the overall clarity in the detail, in the fine detailed areas, particularly at the edges of the image. So again, very useful feature of ACR, very, very simple to work on. By looking at high magnification and using these sliders, it's very immediately obvious that you've been able to correct the problem. It's a problem primarily on wide-angle lenses, so you'll see it on the 18mm. You really will not see it on the 35 or the 60mm lenses. You can go look for it, but I can tell you from experience, you're really only going to find it on the 18, and you'll find it on most manufacturers' wide-angle lenses. So it's not a fault of a Fuji lens, it's a feature of all wide-angle lenses to a greater or lesser extent. So any wide-angle lens you're using, go look closely and use this tool to remove that problem. Okay, so we've got rid of our CA. That's definitely given us a sharper look in this upper foliage area, because it's cleaned up the edges very nicely on that. Let's go to sharpening. This is a key stage in the processing of any RAW file. All RAW files require a level of sharpening. I don't care which camera manufacturer it is. they all come in at a point where they could be considered soft. What they're really requiring you to do is decide how much sharpening you would like to apply to the image to get to a point where you are happy with the result. And that would depend on the output, both the format, whether it's going to digital, whether it's going to print, whether it's going to magazine, and also the size of the output image, whether it's going to be a 6x4, whether it's going to be 10x8, whether it's going to be 20x30, whether it's going to be on a billboard. And that will impact the amount of sharpening you wish to provide. So there is no magic bullet, but I will give you my kind of starting position, and you might want to fine tune from there. I find that if I'm looking at an image like this, and let's zoom in on an area with plenty of detail in on this tree limb here and surrounding leaves, I like to up my sharpening from the default setting, which here was 25, up to around 53 as a start position with an X-Pro1 file, and a radius of 1.3. Now in doing that, the image has gone ahead and sharpened. If you now look at this bark area, for example, and I back the sharpening off, you'll see it go soft. If I bring the sharpening back up to 53, it sharpens back up again. Now you can go crazy with sharpening, and all you'll get out of more sharpening is more and more edge enhancement and halos, and it'll start to look fake, and it's a disaster. So really you've got to fine tune it based on your own requirements, but 53 and 1.3 is a good starting point. If you're using a high ISO, you may then find that enhances image noise. In this case, this is a lower ISO image. I think it's probably an ISO 200. Yes, it is. So there isn't any particular image enhancement of noise. I could go down and look, say, at this stone to see whether it's brought the noise up at all. Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, it's kind of enhancing texture. It could be noise. What I would say is if you do see grain noise coming up out of the image due to the noise being enhanced as well as the edges, go to the luminance noise reduction slider and typically go up to somewhere around a value of 25. That will smooth out the noise without impacting the edges of the image that you've tried to enhance. In this case, I don't think that's a requirement. It's not a high ISO image. So we'll stick with our sharpening at 53 and 1.3. Let's go back to our full-size view. Okay, so we've gone through sharpening, we've gone through removing chromatic aberration, we've adjusted our highlights and black levels. We could also play with our overall exposure levels just to bring a bit more illumination into this shadow area. That's totally up to you. The thing we really haven't played with at this point is the saturation of the image. And there are two ways of doing this. You can do it here in ACR, or you can do it later. I like to use some of Nik's products, and I actually find the saturation adjustments to be a finer quality using some of the Nik filters. But for the sake of this demonstration, we'll use ACR's saturation slider. And a good starting position for any file from an X-Pro is going to be a value of 8 or above. So let's zoom into the image just to get a bit more of a view of how that's impacted the color saturation. If I take this back to 0 and then bump it up here, you can see how much saturation you can add to the image. If you were trying to create a Velvia transparency type look, you might be up in the 30s. That super saturated green. I want something that's more natural looking, so I'm going to go for maybe 10 on this slider, and I've added some nice saturation back into the image. Okay, so that's really all of the key stages that I would apply to a standard RAW file. I've gone ahead and made sure that I'm not clipping. I made sure that I've got genuine blacks in the image. I've made sure I've added saturation. I've gone ahead and added sharpening to the RAW file to give me a crisper image. and as I said, that's a good starting position. You may want to adjust from there. I've gone ahead and removed chromatic aberration from the image file and improved the overall quality of the image. At this point, I'm ready to convert this file into Photoshop. The only thing I would then point out is down here you'll see I've got it set to Adobe RGB 16-bit. I've gone for a 16-bit image conversion to get the maximum color resolution out of this image. Later, when I convert to a JPEG, it's going to convert it down maybe to an 8-bit JPEG for web use. But while I'm trying to get the most out of my image file, I absolutely want it 16 bits of color. So worth setting that up on your ACR. So I go ahead and open the image. This will take a second or two just to render. And here's my converted RAW file. You'll see it's the same file number as the JPEG, so we are comparing like for like. And actually, if I go back to the original file and then size them exactly the same, I can flick between the two. You can immediately see the difference that the saturation and the white balance have had, and also my adjustments of black level and highlight. You can also see, interestingly, if you look at the top here, when you flick between the JPEG and the RAW, you can see the image shape just stretch slightly on the JPEG. Here's the JPEG and here's the RAW. That's the in-camera image correction that Fuji are doing to that image. They're making some changes to the JPEG before they deliver it to you to remove image distortion from the lens, and that is not present in the RAW file conversion. Now you can see as I flick between the two, the actual difference is minor. If you wanted to correct that in the final Photoshop image, you could go ahead and stretch that image to make that correction. It's not a big deal with the Fuji lenses. On some of their other lenses, like the X100, the lens corrections are more severe, and it's worthwhile getting a lens profile in the case of the X100 to make that correction for you. In this case, I don't think it's a big deal. So let's zoom in on an area of interest. Let's go in nice and close, up to 100% on the on an area of interest, and let's do the same on the JPEG. So we should have them fairly well aligned. They're pretty close. Let's flick between the two. Here's my out of camera JPEG. Look at the amount of image data in the bark and the leaves. Particularly look at the way the highlights render on the wall and on the branch. And then let's flick over to the RAW file conversion. There is far more detail. The highlights have got recovered information in them. The white balance is far better. There is more detail in the foliage area in the leaf. I'll just flick backwards and forwards a few times. So that's it. That's a typical RAW file process for me. I would then typically go further with any image that I have and use Nik filters to provide further enhancements, particularly around structure and maybe some localized dodging and burning type effects. But I think maybe I'll cover that in another video. And I'll probably do another one around Nik conversion to black and white from X-Pro1 RAW as well. Hope that's been helpful, and look forward to getting some response.